Greetings and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm glad you could be here. Before we begin, please take a moment to hit those like and subscribe buttons. It all helps feed the hungry algorithm. And while you're at it, consider going and checking us out over on Patreon. The link is at the top of my YouTube page and in the video description down below. And let me give a quick shout out to my Tier 4 patrons, Russ of the Frozen North, Neo5AC, and Nick. Thank you very much. And now, on with the story. The Deathworlders, a story by Philip R. Johnson, a.k.a. Hambone, Hambone HFY, and Hambone 3110. Chapter 22, Warhorse, the Fourth Year, Part 4. Date point, 8 years, 9 months AV. HMS Sharman, Folktha, Cimbrean, the Far Reaches. Major Owen Powell. Being a minute later than he'd planned heading for today's training session meant that Powell was just late enough to run into Technical Sergeant Kovac coming down the hall the other way, struggling under a cardboard box that she could have fit inside. Delivery for you, Major. Powell stood and brought his hands together in a single eager clap.
Outstanding, he declared. I ordered those a month ago.
Yes, sir, Kovac agreed blandly, neither assuming responsibility for the delay nor assigning it.
Powell chuckled. For crying out loud, leave them there and grab a trolley. We'll hand them out after today's scenario, he declared. Assuming there's enough for everyone.
Yes, sir. Kovac put the box down gratefully. I inventoried it all myself. Everything's as ordered.
Well done. We already planned how this was going to go. Get them set up and ready for presentation once the scenario's done. Don't be late.
Yes, sir.
Carry on.
Scenario days were Powell's favorite part of the SOR training regime. Gravball was fun, and the academic lessons were fascinating, but nothing quite matched the simple, mildly sadistic joy of seeing the lads tackle simulated missions in the warehouse. The warehouse had been his personal request to HMS Sharman in the weeks before they'd come back here, and it had been the base's willingness to accommodate his request that had finalized the decision. It was the size of an aircraft hangar and full of the very latest in gravity plating and holographic emitters, and backed up by a dedicated staff of scenario planners and fresh-faced young specialists with the skills necessary to create, animate, and deploy simulated hostiles via those emitters. They had been given 3 simple instructions. The scenarios must be unpredictable. They must simulate the sorts of conditions and situations that the SOR might find themselves in on actual missions, and they must be slightly beyond the lads' abilities, enough so that for them to actually complete the scenario and win would be unlikely, but not so much as to render the task actually impossible. They had rerun one of the old scenarios last week by way of a demonstration, along the lines of, "Look how far you've come." Not only had the lads completed it, they'd done so without suffering so much as a simulated scratch, even in the sections they hadn't reached first time through. It had been an education for Powell, too, seeing just what they were capable of. Ares climbing a rope up the kind of falling hallway trap that Kaminsky had once described, with his legs wrapped around Vandenberg, who was no lightweight himself, both in their suits and with full combat load. Akiyama overriding the electronic lock in a door panel in seconds, though that was doubtless down to the fact that he'd ordered a gross of the most common makes of door lock in the Dominion and spent his spare time for most of a month tinkering with them. All of the lads were now like that, though. They'd become addicted to self-improvement, to the point where if a day went past where they weren't challenged, weren't learning something new, or advancing an existing skill, they got listless and boisterous. Keeping them stocked with books, tools, and materials to further their lust for personal perfection wasn't just a training expense, it was a morale and discipline one. Not that Powell himself was any different, of course. His personal quarters had gone from containing only 3 books, The Art of War, The Complete SAS Survival Manual, and Masters of Command, Hannibal, Caesar, and the Genius of Leadership, to containing 2 overworked bookshelves that each held dozens covering military history of the last 300 years and including Machiavelli, Plato, the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, and some of the better introductory volumes in the fields of psychology, the history and design of games, physics, and communications, plus several classic science fiction authors, Niven, Purnell, Banks, Simmons, Clarke, and Asimov. And because he'd been left squinting at the literary references in the Simmons Hyperion cantos and Ilium, that had led to him buying Homer, Proust, Shakespeare, and Keats into the bargain. His old man would have looked at a room full of that many books and promptly declared that it could have only belonged to a poof, and the reality of his son's command, condition, and intellect would have not made a jot of difference. Powell Sr. had been a deeply anti-intellectual man to cover his own illiteracy, and quick to pin anything he didn't like on poofs. Just one of the many reasons Powell so valued his own education. Not that he appreciated it when he was young, of course. The physical effects of Crew D were obvious, there for anyone to see. But now he cast his memory back a few years, and could see Jen Delaney mastering marksmanship in a single lesson, or Saunders building a working starship out of scraps and salvage in a mere 2 weeks. He was beginning to become seriously worried that the core tie might have badly miscalculated. He set aside his worries about having created a monster when he realized that he'd easily loped the distance from the office complex to the training center in hardly any time at all, at speeds that most people would consider a dead run, and without so much as a spare gasp of breath to show for it, even though that itself was pause-worthy. He was here to run a training operation. Cogitation could wait, for now. For all its high-tech contents, the warehouse was controlled from what was basically a shed, fully half of which was computers, between which the team of 4 young men who organized and oversaw the exercise sat in a square, facing away from one another. There literally wasn't room for more than one of them to stand up at a time, and Powell had given them special dispensation to not react to his entering except by straightening in their seats and looking towards him.
All set up, he asked.
Yes, sir. Corporal Jenkins was the senior NCO in the shed and the senior team leader. He had once been heard to describe himself as the Dungeon Master.
Good. I look forward to it. Change of plan for the end of session today, though. Report to the end zone once you've saved the footage and turned everything off.
Yes, sir.
Right, as you were.
He jogged the last 100 yards to the warehouse's door. The lads were all suited up and ready to go, waiting for him in their EV mass systems and practically creaking under the weight of all their gear they carried for training.
All right, lads. About time again. Fall in.
They did so, eager to get going.
The scenario we're gaming today is an assault on a hierarchy space station, populated by traps and active defenses, under the direct control of a hierarchy operator,
he explained.
Your mission is to reach the computer core, pull the data, then get that data off the station and into Intel's hands by whatever means are possible. We're simulating that you've breached in from EVA. You're going in blind. That means no hints about what threats you might find or face or where you might find them. Any questions?
They all shook their heads.
Right. Systems check on your suits. Give us a thumbs up when you're ready.
He left them to it and climbed the ladder up into the observation gantry, a cabin that ran along the ceiling on rails from which the occupants were able to look down into the training area.
Ready?
He asked, pulling the ladder up behind him. Ready, sir!
Right. Wait for the thumbs up and let's see how we do.
He watched the men below go through the last round of confirming each other's suits, a lesson that had been drilled into them by Drew Cavendish from day one, before they gathered around Legsy in a huddle to talk plan. By agreement, the game controllers did not get to hear that plan. Powell did, because he wasn't the one giving the orders. He was there to watch, observe, and think about how he'd have approached things. And so far, he'd agreed with every decision Legsy was making, including the one about leaving the 2 protectors behind, much to their dismay. The huddle broke up. Everyone headed for their respective loadout station to grab the equipment they decided they'd need, and Powell tuned in on Legsy again as he patted Ares on the upper arm. You okay? You know me. I hate being left in the back. Yeah, pal, I would too, but trust me, we don't put our best at risk until we have to. Ari's silence spoke volumes on what he thought of that assessment. Legs? Nah, mate, said that for a reason. I'd rather have one of you bored and a jump away than 50 other medics right next to me in the fight, and you'd better bloody believe I mean that. The younger man didn't say anything, just nodded, then grabbed Legsie's gauntlet and drew him into the kind of body-slamming hug that would have pulverized bricks. "You get through this without needing us? I'm buying the drinks." "Fuck aye. See you after." Powell didn't need to be listening on the radio to hear Legsie calling for the safety officer, who performed a final round of checks to make sure that every last weapon, round, and grenade they had on them were training versions, blank rounds, dummy grenades, and the laser-based Miles training equipment. The lads formed up, gave each other a round of slaps in the head, fist bumps, and other suitably violent masculine gestures, and Legsie aimed a raised thumb at the control box. The simulated violence below unfolded. Knowing what they did about the hierarchy, every simulated mission worked off the assumption that the mind in question knew they were coming, detected the intrusion within seconds, and that it would bring out its best and most potentially effective gambits first, but not unwisely. What exactly those gambits would be was always an exercise in the game designers' imaginations, informed by the sorts of things they had learned from Delaney, Saunders, and Six, and their own sadistic machinations. Cloaked assault robots with fusion blades for limbs, several varieties of small flying drones, from the ones that had stopped and deployed a plasma weapon to the kind that the game techs had invented that were basically just a flying fusion blade designed to flash at speed straight down a corridor and have every man in it at the waist. Gravity traps, various kinds of turret, rooms full of hair-trigger explosives, rooms where the power cables had been wired like a grid on a bug zapper, even simulated human biodrone soldiers. There had even once been a room full of sex slaves sporting the faces of a number of actresses and singers, an encounter so absurd that the simulation had been abandoned, and the two men responsible had been motivated to remember their responsibilities by means of having them train with Staff Sergeant Aries, under orders that he was not to be friendly about it. Given how uncomfortable and time-consuming it was to both don and remove the suit, Aries had obliged with relish, though he had quite kindly carried the two broken perpetrators back to their rooms once he was done. There had been no such lapses of professionalism since. Each simulation was designed to take a few hours. There was a lot of room in the warehouse, and the simulation techs worked all week to configure the next scenario ahead of training day. Beating the crap out of those two with Warhorse had probably spared them the wrath of their fellows, or at least the worst of it. Today, there were no such shenanigans. The aggressors were a blur, emptying each room of anything that even resembled a threat almost before they'd finished entering it. That was doctrine. It had to be assumed that nobody and nothing encountered in a scenario where the hierarchy were involved was a friendly, unless it was clearly and obviously not a threat and could not possibly become so. And even then, it was to be treated as suspicious until proven otherwise. The defenders were no less deadly, but their deadliness was more methodical, laying sensors and mines behind them, carrying spare ammo for the aggressors, watching the aggressors' backs, disarming traps, and overcoming engineering and technical challenges. When the team had to climb up a long hallway that had its gravity rotated by 90 degrees, the defenders were the ones who deployed the ropes. There were firefights against an entrenched squad of simulated Chinasho troops, easily brushed aside. There was a desperate battle against a pack of flying blades, one of which only narrowly failed to kill Firth. There was a holographic Vulza. Price dodged the snap of its jaws, wrapped his arm around its snout, and held on while Blazinski bayoneted it in the eye. It took nearly 20 minutes for Vandenberg and Akiyama to disarm a particularly nasty electrical discharge trap, while the rest of the men dug in and warded off probing attacks by an increasingly desperate hierarchy force, which turned out to be a distraction. No sooner was the trap disarmed and the squad retreating into the room than a gunship, an illusion projected by the huge window that ran the length of the room, decloaked and began to fire indiscriminately through the glass. A quick jerk of the gravity approximated the room decompressing. They all grabbed handholds so that none of them were spaced by the simulated blowout, but finally 3 of the lads were forced to obey the rules of the simulation and lie down inactive as their Miles systems reported incapacitating hits. Powell leaned forward to watch eagerly. Their performance while things had been going well had been exemplary. Now he was interested in seeing how they performed when the shit hit the fan. Those were the moments that a unit truly showed its quality. They didn't disappoint. One of the functions of the mid-suit's active padding was to close any breaches in the pressure hull, but still, a penetrating wound shot while wearing EV masks in the vacuum was a deadly matter, demanding immediate extraction to a pressurized environment before all else. That was the Protector's job. Everyone in that room knew it. They also knew that the Protectors weren't there, and that the lives of their comrades, simulation be damned, they were all too motivated to care about the difference, depended on them getting into that room ASAP and clearing the way for them to do their jobs. Legsy didn't waste a second and fired a grenade out of his gun's M203 at the gunship, supported by a hail of rapid fire from the others. The simulation decided that he scored a hit, which, combined with the bullets, did enough to badly damage the vehicle's canopy and spoil its pilot's view, causing the projected gunship to sway crazily and spray the exterior hull of the station with wasted shots. Had the fight been real, the room would have been in vacuum, which would have allowed Ares and Burgess to jump straight into their buddies' beacons. In reality, it was of course flooded with air. Fortunately, they'd planned for that, which was why the two Protectors had been walking along above their comrades a few rooms back, ready to drop in through the hatches in the ceilings when summoned. This they now did, arriving in the room just as alacrituously as if they had just displaced it, and Powell grunted in satisfaction as Burgess took immediate stock of the situation, grabbed the downed Vandenberg, hoisted him up onto his shoulders, and retreated towards the door in the next room that the defenders were working on breaching, covered by the aggressors as they continued to suppress the pursuing hierarchy forces. Ares got cocky. He tried to lift the remaining two fallen men simultaneously, rather than extracting the one who was in the most immediate danger. There was no doubt that the young man was the strongest on the team, scoring over even Burgess by a fair margin, and that fact had been going to his head lately. Not in any overt, swaggering way, but just in his growing assurance that he was capable of anything. Powell tutted outwardly, but inwardly he was pleased, knowing that the kid was about to get the ego check he needed. There was some muttered astonishment in the control room at the fact that he'd actually managed it, getting Murray and Sykes off the ground and carried just fine. But Powell had done the maths. Ares may have been strong, but the simple physics of the situation, his mass relative to the combined weight of the two men he was lifting, simply didn't work out in his favor. He was off balance from the moment he teetered upright, and when he turned to haul them to the exit, he just couldn't manage any real speed or momentum. It cost him. The gunship's wild spraying hadn't entirely ceased to be a threat, and its Miles laser strobed through the room for a second, scoring a hit on the kid's left leg, and Powell smiled grimly as he heard a vigorous Spanish curse at the report that, although his suit's impressive armor plating hadn't been breached, the impact had broken a bone. The honor system was important. They had all been drilled from early on that cheating the wound results just meant doing themselves out of proper training and experience. Ares dutifully fell over and stopped using his left leg. Sitting on the ground, he had far less leverage. With a groan of exertion, he hauled Firth into cover that protected him from more stray firepower from the gunship, then began to drag Murray towards the exit door. He made good time despite having only one leg to work with, too. Burgess deposited his patient with the defenders as they got the door open, then dashed back across the room, grabbed Firth, and returned him to the door with the same kind of ease that Powell might have hefted a box of printer paper. Then he was back for Murray, and finally Ares. The kid was smart enough to notice that, Powell knew. Doing one man at a time had allowed Burgess to clear 4 men out of the room faster than Ares had handled 2. That wouldn't be missed. The simulation ended practically the moment the aggressors retreated through the door. Legsy barked orders, and within seconds they had all activated their jump beacons, for training purposes replaced with a red light, and the simulation shut down as the last one lit. A siren hooted, the lights came up, and the lads all stood up, dusted themselves off, and made wobbly-handed, wobbly-headed gestures of mixed feeling at one another as they discussed the outcome, took off their helmets, bumped fists, and commiserated with each other. Powell took his time down the ladder and strolled thoughtfully across the concrete with his hands on the small of his back, giving the lads plenty of time to leave the course, sort their gear out, and get lined up.
"Master Sergeant," he said quietly, greeting Legsy, "I'd like to hear your reasons for aborting the raid and pulling out, please."
"Sir, the longer we took, the more likely the hierarchy mind was to have just deleted the data. With all the lads up and running, I was happy to take that chance. But after we got stuck on that trap and took our casualties...
You deemed it prudent to preserve assets.
Yes, sir. Powell nodded pensively and made a show of mulling over Legsy's explanation.
I agree,
he declared after some few seconds, and he knew Legsy well enough to spot the invisibly subtle cues of relief in his friend's face. He tucked his thumbs into his belt and looked up and down the line.
What we know of the hierarchy says that they're rigid thinkers, as suggested by the name,
he said.
They come up with good plans, but they rely on those plans too much. They don't adapt well if their plan fails. They like to go away, think about it, seek the advice of a senior mind, and form a new plan. With that in mind, he continued, the way to fight them is through unrelenting aggression. Break their first gambit and keep the pressure on. Don't give them time to think. Don't allow them a moment's breathing room. So long as the situation is unfolding quickly, they'll be panicking and caught on the back foot, and anything they put in your way is only going to be half thought out. This is something that every man on the team must take part in. You must appear to be unstoppable, so you must never stop. Never stop moving. Never stop doing, even if just handing out the ammo or swapping out your juice cartridge. And above all, keep the pressure on. You cannot afford to be bogged down dealing with a trap that's going to take 20 minutes to disarm. Find an alternate route. Cut a hole in the wall. Fucking go EVA if you have to. But do not, ever stop moving. Do you understand?
Yes, sir, they nodded, seeing and understanding what he was saying.
Right. This isn't the result we were hoping for today,
he said, and saw them all nodding and thinking.
But it was good enough. Kovac!
The sergeant and a handful of other NCOs entered with a parade procession, having been waiting as ordered, and the operators all straightened up as they saw the berets being carried out on trays towards them, knowing what it meant. Powell started out with baseball.
Burgess, you did good work today,
he said.
Efficient, fast, bold. Don't stress about not carrying as much as the Incredible Hulk there. Don't doubt for a second that your speed is the unique skill you bring to this team. Don't lose sight of that.
Burgess accepted the beret. It was black with 2 pins on it. The Vitruvian Man emblem of the SOR, and a small circular pin adorned with a pair of green feet that Powell could tell he wanted to burst into a wide grin upon seeing.
Yes, we kept your bloody green feet,
he smiled and stepped back, waiting. Burgess saluted eagerly, a gesture which Powell returned with rather more composure than he felt.
Ares, you're clearly strong enough to carry 2 men in EV mass, but you've got no control over the momentum. Just remember that 1 man saved is better than 3 dead. You'd have got them all without even tiring yourself if you'd taken it steady.
He handed over the second beret with the green feet pin and returned the younger man's salute, keeping his immense pride in the lad to himself. It wouldn't do to seem to have a favorite.
For our defenders, I know it's not an emblem of your original training, but for you, we've selected the castle. You've wonderfully fallen into your roles as the finest combat engineers ever, and something tells me you won't mind. Am I right?
Essay on, sir, Sykes commented.
Well said.
Powell handed him the beret.
Just don't become so focused on working on the challenge directly in front of you that you forget the bigger challenge of the whole mission.
He shared similar words of wisdom and gestures of respect with the remaining defenders, then turned to the last and largest group.
And for my fellow aggressors, the dagger, the symbol of which should hopefully need no explaining. You are the swift, the deadly, and the skillful. Attack from all angles, show no quarter or hesitation, and there is nothing you cannot slay.
He stepped back.
This is a moment to take pride in yourselves, but it is also a moment for humility. We've chosen the black beret for a good reason. Yes, the black of space, obviously, but more important is that the black beret is the color worn by many an ordinary infantry and marine the world over. It is critical that we all remain grounded and conscious of the fact that we are all just servicemen, fighting for the same reasons as any other. You have done what many hundreds of thousands in our home nation's armed services could not, he continued, and then he gestured to Kovac and the men beside her. But you would not be SOR without our technicians and support staff, which is why I want you to help me hand out our berets and insignia to everyone else in this regiment. We are the tip of the spears, but without the wood behind it, a spear tip alone is a poor weapon.
Yes, sir! They seemed eager to do as he said, and he allowed himself to smile at the fierce pride shining in their faces.
Congratulations, gentlemen. This unit is now active.
Date point, 8 years, 10 months AV. London, England, Earth. Charlotte Gilroy. Being tall and slim meant that Charlotte had always suffered in the cold, and there was just no substitute on dark, frozen evenings for pajamas, loungewear, 2 blankets, a hot chocolate, and a nice warm boyfriend on the couch. For once, they were actually hanging out at home rather than at Sean's house. Their place was a student flat that she, Ben, and Ava could just afford on their combined housing allowance. 2 bedrooms, a tiny bathroom, and a small shared space that did the work of kitchen, dining room, and living room all in one. At least, she and Ben were hanging out. Ava was busy getting ready, and Sean was busy Ava watching. If Charlotte had been forced to pick a word to describe his expression, it might have been guarded. Sean usually had the light of intellectual good humor in his eyes and a slight smile around his mouth, as if he'd gotten the joke on life and was just waiting for everyone else to get it so that they could laugh together. Seeing him look tense, stressed, and serious was a new one on her, even though only somebody who knew him well would have noticed. Something similar went for Ava, who was usually the very picture of composure and confidence, but today was a bundle of jittery happiness, flitting restlessly from minor adjustment to insignificant chore, allegedly to make sure everything was perfect, more likely to try and retain what little equilibrium she had left. "He just got on the tube," she announced, waving her phone at them. Sean stood up and headed for the door. "Sean?" Sean cleared his throat. "We're out of milk," he grunted. To her credit, Ava's happy buzzing ceased, and she rushed up to him and gave him a reassuring kiss. "Okay," she said. "You go get the milk." "I may be some time," Sean replied, some of the humor returning weakly to his face. "It's okay," she promised. "I'd like for you to meet him, though." "I'll try," Sean promised unconvincingly and let himself out. Ava's shoulders dropped as the door closed, but she picked herself up again after a second and turned around. "How do I look?" "You know damn well you look amazing," Ben told her, causing Charlotte to roll her eyes a bit, but nod vigorously alongside him. Ava smiled a little at the compliment and went back to her restless bumbling around the flat. "Have you ever seen her so nervous?" Charlotte whispered, once she judged Ava to be safely out of earshot. "Nope." They let her bustle around some more until she suddenly laughed aloud. "Ha! Message from Sean! Just passed a side of beef getting out of a taxi. Take it that's your fella?" She waved her phone again and giggled. "Good to know he's able to laugh about this," Ben commented. "I know it's hard on him," Ava replied, "but, well, we talked about this before we started. What more can I do?" The creaking of the stairs up their door stopped Charlotte from answering. She just shrugged and smiled weakly. Ever since Sean and Ava had opened up to her about their affair, she'd had serious doubts about it. Being in a committed relationship herself, it was hard to see how anything good could come out of cheating. The instant change in Ava's attitude dispelled most of those doubts. She practically flew to the door, glancing through the peephole, then flung it open with a delighted noise. It was like watching the dawn break on the first clear day of the new year after a long and dismal winter. Everything about Ava's behavior calmed and perked up to a startling degree. In half a second, she changed so utterly that it made Charlotte wonder if she'd actually seen her friend relax before. Adam was surprising. He was actually a little shorter than Ava and well dressed in charcoal utility trousers and a light jacket over an NFL jersey, clothing calculated to make him look a little smaller than he really was. This was largely futile, considering that after he'd finally been able to weaken Ava's stranglehold hug on him, he'd had to turn slightly to fit through the door. He gave Charlotte and Ben a shy smile as he did so. Ava made the introductions. Adam, Ben, Charlotte. There was a round of nice to meet yous and highs with matching handshakes, and it dawned on Charlotte that Adam was actually rather dorky. He'd geeked out hugely over Ben's tattoo when the koi carp Ben was sporting today decided to swim up his sleeve and down the other arm just as they were shaking hands. "Oh my God, where do I get one of those?" he demanded. "Can you turn them off so they don't show?" "Yep," Ben replied, answering the second question first. "Mind you, these cost me a couple of £1,000, and," he extended a forearm alongside Adam's own. The contrast was like comparing a shot glass to a pint mug. "You're a bit bigger of a canvas, mate." "Yeah, but think about what I could have on there," Adam chuckled. "I could watch movies." He was likable, nice, and when Charlotte made eye contact with Ava as Ben slapped his forehead and bemoaned never thinking of that, the look she got back had an undeniable "told you so" element to it. "Come on, meat stack," Ava leaned forward and got Adam's attention again. "We're going into the city, remember?" "Oh, yeah." Adam stood up, then looked around. "I was kind of hoping to meet Sean, too. He sounds like a great guy, isn't he here?" "He had to go home," Ben lied for the three of them. "He wasn't feeling well." "Aw, that sucks. Tell him I said hi, would you?" "We will," Charlotte promised. And that was that. Ava gave them a grateful sort of shrug as she left, and they listened to him enthusing as she followed him down the stairs about seeing the Tower Bridge and the Eye and HMS Belfast and the Buckingham Palace and... "So," Ben cleared his throat after the creaking of the stairs and litany of tourist traps had faded, "he's actually a really nice guy. How the fuck did that happen?" Charlotte had to nod, watching the door a little warily, not quite sure what to make of this new information. "I don't understand," she agreed, and turned to frown her confusion at Ben. "He's adorkable." "So why is she... she's gone from miserable to really happy these last few weeks." Charlotte thought about it. "Has she?" she asked eventually. You saw how she lit up there, didn't you?" "Yeah," Ben said. "I don't think I've ever seen her so animated." "Maybe she hasn't been happy recently. Maybe she's just been..." Ben nodded. "Coping." Charlotte scratched at her bra strap, frowning at something only she could see in deep thought, until Ben slipped an arm around her waist. "Are we okay with that?" he asked. "I think... yeah, or at least I am," she replied. "I think if she's doing it to cope, so she can get through and have more of that, then I can understand." "Yeah, but what about Sean?" "That's where it all falls apart, yeah," she agreed. Neither of them said anything for a while, and after a bit, Ben turned on the TV. They were in the middle of a report about the Iranian nuclear weapons program when Sean finally returned with a shopping bag and the expression of a condemned man. "Hey. Hey. Hey." Sean dropped his bag on the coffee table and himself into the chair next to it, rubbing at his forehead as if he was trying to iron out the frown and watching the news with them. Clearly, he had other things on his mind. "So what's he like?" "He's actually really nice," Charlotte told him, keeping her tone of voice delicate and sympathetic. "I already knew that," Sean told her, dropping his hand into his lap and managing a weak smile. "You did?" "Course I bloody do. Ava's told us that enough times, hasn't she?" Ben and Charlotte exchanged a glance. "I really didn't believe it before now," Ben confessed. Why not? Sean asked him. Well, he keeps hurting her. Right, because he's a fucking idiot. A really nice fucking idiot that she loves so much that I'm fucking lucky just to be the fucking crutch for their relationship. Sean surged upright, stood there for a second with his face turned away from them, then heaved a huge sigh and headed for the door. I'll see you Monday. Charlotte scrambled up out of Ben's lap to try and talk to him, putting a hand on his upper arm. Sean! He turned and made a fleeting, unconvincing eye contact. I'm fine, Fairy, he lied, using the group's pet nickname for Charlotte. You're not, mate, Ben pointed out. Well, better me then than her, isn't it? She's suffered enough. Charlotte's hand dropped to her side, and he shrugged his jacket on. I'll see you Monday. Charlotte didn't stop him this time. Date point. Christmas Eve. 8 years, 11 months AV. New York City, USA, Earth. Riley Jackson. Presentable? Well, we'd have preferred you wear a dress, but you are here in a military capacity. Riley suppressed a sigh and turned it into a smile. Trust me, I wouldn't be comfortable in a dress. The makeup artist grunted her acknowledgement and stood up. Well, you look good, she said. You're on in 3 minutes, Major, one of the clipboarded production staff informed her. I'll let you prepare yourself, the makeup girl said, and excused herself. Riley had to fight not to fidget at her dress blues and adjust her ribbon star. She hated staff duty. But there were worse things in life than going on evening talk shows, she supposed. Public relations was an easy gig, even if it did mean she was stuck at ground level for the duration. The worst parts were always the personal questions. They were inevitable if you were the woman who first officially traveled faster than light, but why should they be? Give her questions about the technology, about modified Alcubierre fields, about the dynamics of exoatmospheric navigation and piloting. Too many newspapers wanted to know if she was dating somebody or something like that, and even if the American public were ready to truly embrace an African-American woman being the modern answer to Neil Armstrong, they still probably weren't ready for their cultural icon to be unabashedly and pansexually promiscuous. Not that it would have been anybody's business even if she'd been in a traditional marriage with 2 kids. She'd sooner do a nude photo shoot than talk about family in the presence of a microphone. She forced aside those kind of resentful thoughts as the 1-minute warning was called and gritted her teeth against the urge to tend to some last-second grooming. She'd only undo all the hard work of the production crew. The wait ended abruptly. She heard her name announced, rapturous cheering and applause, the band striking up a jazzed-up version of the theme from the old 1960s Star Trek, and she pretended to be delighted and amused by it as she stepped out onto the stage, waving and smiling and shaking hands with the host, David somebody. She was solid on the David at least, but, oh, no, his full name was part of the show's name, which filled the stage. David Royce. Settling onto the couch as the applause finally began to fade was a solid relief. What a reception, Royce declared over the hubbub, then repeated himself as he got quieter. What a reception. Wow, so, Major Jackson, or can I call you Riley? Riley's fine. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. It's a real pleasure to have you. It's a real change of pace, Riley said, having already planned ahead of time that this was an entirely truthful sentiment that would nevertheless sound misleadingly enthusiastic. Royce was sharp, though. For the better, I hope. Riley gave him her best sheepish smile. Truthfully, I'm so in love with my job that they had to drag me down here. I can see why, Royce agreed. You did a tour in the Middle East. I flew a handful of missions several thousand feet above the Middle East, Riley corrected him. She'd spent that entire conflict living comfortably in Germany and was eager for there to be no confusion. Did a tour made it sound like she'd been checking her boots in the desert every morning, and she didn't want to overshadow the people who really had been putting up with the conditions down there. Royce politely ignored the interruption. Then you trained and flew for Pandora, and now you're a permanent fixture of the Air Force's 946 Spaceflight Wing, and I'm told you're unusually devoted to your plane. I think we all are on the 946th, Riley said. You know, there's an extra requirement there that we might wind up adrift and out in deep space or having to land on a station or planet a long way from Earth and have to maintain or repair our own plane in the field. So all of the pilots have got a habit of getting right in there with the ground staff and mechanics and being part of the plane's maintenance.
That's unusual.
Well, I think it was that willingness to roll up my sleeves and get elbowed deep in the machinery that actually got me into Pandora. Because, she was a prototype, a test bed. There was always something on the verge of going wrong with her, Riley said. But nowadays, it's a point of pride in the wing. You look after your sled. You get to know her and love her and...
Love her?
Oh, yeah, Riley enthused. Firebird's like a 10,000-pound metal kitten to me. Every pilot in the wing could tell you about their sled's little personality quirks.
Okay, go on, Riley challenged and humored her. What are Firebirds?
Oh, nothing major, just little things, like the way her field-assisted landing system is always the first thing to need recalibrating, or the way the hum of the gyroscope changes as we fly, that kind of thing.
Royce smiled, and Riley knew that smile. It was the one that came before the questions started to get more personal. So, he began, is Firebird the only love in your life, or...
I'm very career-focused, Riley said dismissively.
Your career can't take up all of your time, though.
Military careers they're not fair on any partner you might have, so I've preferred not to get drawn into anything long-term like that.
Royce raised an eyebrow. Surely there are people you care about.
Of course there are, Riley said. Some of them aren't even human. I just don't think it's fair to devote years of your life to the service and force your partner to take second place. I've got nothing but respect for the guys and girls who can make it work, but, heck, the Dear John letter is named for something that happens to soldiers all the time. And what about the kids? Have you ever seen that picture of this little boy being handed his daddy's folded flag, and he's trying not to cry?
She shrugged and deflated.
I cried when I saw that, she confessed,
glancing nervously at the camera, even as the audience erupted into sympathetic applause. Royce clearly decided that he couldn't press the privacy issue any further without making himself look like the bad guy, so he moved on, introducing the scheduled commercial break.
You're doing well, he confided the moment the microphones were off. Sorry if I hit a raw nerve. It's okay, Riley assured him, surprised and pleased and warming up a bit. The makeup artists were rushing out, and she and Royce both endured a quick touch-up before the end of the ad break was called, and it was back into interview mode.
Tonight, we've got Major Riley Jackson here with us today. Are you enjoying yourself so far, Riley?
So far, Riley agreed.
So, we've heard a few rumors coming out of defense circles lately about a few projects. SOR and jets?
Oh yeah, those are both really exciting, Riley nodded, enthused to be back on professional subjects.
Why don't you tell us about them?
Okay, so SOR and JETS stand for Spaceborne Operations Regiment and Joint Extraterrestrial Special Operations, respectively, Riley said.
Those sound like they're more or less the same thing, Royce inclined his head.
Far from it, Riley shook her head. The SOR are specifically going to be about missions in space, wearing an armored spacesuit, boarding ships and stations, that sort of thing. Now, the thing about spacesuits is that they're heavy. I can attest to that personally. An armored one? Doubly so.
So, these guys gotta be strong.
That's right, really strong. Crazy strong and fit. Now, the problem there is, if they're fighting a heavy suit and being all big and strong, that means they're going to run out of gas pretty quick. So they're all about getting one specific job done fast and hard, right?
And jets? Royce misspoke the acronym, saying the word jets.
JETS, Riley corrected him. So the SOR are a permanent dedicated unit, while the JETS is a qualification that any serving operator can obtain that'll qualify them to go off-world. And they'll fit the opposite role, operations on the surface of alien planets, specifically temperate-type worlds, Earth-like worlds with life and rain and all that stuff, right? So, JETS is this mixed international and kind of large initiative where we'll be able to drop these guys in and they'll be able to do things like patrol in hostile territory for months undetected, or all the other stuff that special forces might do. No special spacesuits or anything. To all the intents and purposes, it's the same as operations here on Earth, just with having to account for alien environments. So, the SOR are the really science fiction ones, Royce observed. I guess, Riley laughed. But they're as nice a bunch of guys as you could meet. They've committed to saving lives and serving other people in a big way. They've gone through hell to make it happen, and I've met them. They're all really humble, sweet guys. You know, they met me and they just wanted to take some selfies. And I was like, who's taking this selfie with who here? Because, yeah, I'm in awe of them. I really am. Did you hear the content of that leaked advisory? Royce asked, referring to a minor scandal of a few months previous where a memo doing the rounds in the Pentagon had somehow found its way into the internet. Riley was on to him now and knew that he was only asking because that was his job, so she just nodded calmly. Obviously, that's a serious breach of national security, but in any case, the content of that memo was no more classified than anything I just told you, she replied, which is to say, it's not. Doesn't it concern you that we're still using an alien-made shuttlecraft? I've seen those shuttles in action, Riley said. And yeah, okay, as a pilot, they suck. They're idiot-proof, unarmed, unarmored civilian models, so they just don't perform to the kind of high standard that the military demands. But they work, and right now, we don't have a human-made alternative that does. Why not? Well, okay, look. We've really got lucky with Pandora and the TS-2 and with some other projects like the V-Class and the San Diego class because people, real, qualified aerospace engineers, had always put serious thought into designing them as like a thought experiment right down to the every rivet and solder. And then, when all the alien technology came along, modifying those designs turned out to be pretty easy. So, nobody had designed an orbit-to-ground transport before now? Royce asked, sounding skeptical. Transports aren't like those other two, Riley pointed out. You can make some assumptions about how big and heavy the pilot of a strike craft is going to be, how many crew are going to fit into a destroyer. But what about the transport? Until you know how many people it's going to need to carry and how much gear they've got with them and... She trailed off expressively to indicate the long list of things that needed to be known before such a design could even be started. Until you know all that, then you can't progress beyond speculation. Then it comes down to compromises. A small ship's harder to detect and intercept, but if it's got enough engine and power on board to accelerate as hard as we'd like them to, then there's not much room for cargo. Excuse me. She took a sip of water before continuing. Anything capable of meeting our performance requirements is going to be huge. Then you can't actually use the flight deck of any of the classes of ships we've got right now, not even the big retrofitted alien ones. So that means docking ports. Well, neither V-Class nor San Diego have got docking ports because none of our existing docking port designs were meant to be used on an accelerating starship. She waved her hands expressively back and forth as she spoke, ending with a snapping motion to illustrate the problem. Royce sat back. So, do you have any idea when somebody will get it right? He asked. I couldn't say, Riley shook her head. I'm not aware of any promising designs in the works, and if there were, I wouldn't be at liberty to discuss them. But, to be honest, I think we're going to have to do without for a few years yet. It's going to be a tough one to solve, I think. But you're confident it'll be solved, Royce observed. Oh, yeah, Riley nodded. Eventually, but designing any vehicle doesn't just happen overnight, let alone something like a shuttlecraft. Riley, it's been great having you on the show. It's been great being here. Well, I hope you stick around for our next guest. Daniel Mayhew is here to talk about sweet dreams, and we've got South African comedian Raymond Mungali coming up after the break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am the Casual Deathworlder, your host, and this has been the conclusion of The Deathworlders, Chapter 22, Year 4. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. If you did, please go ahead and smash those like and subscribe buttons. Maybe drop us a comment down below. It all helps feed the hungry algorithm. Now, as always, a huge shout out to my editor, Gregor. Thank you very much, buddy. I could not do this without you. And yes, we're almost through. Okay. Coming up next week, assuming nothing goes completely sideways with my life again, will be the next chapter of Deathworld Origins and chapter 22, year 5, or at least the beginning of it. That'll be, let me see. Okay, that will be 2 relatively short parts. I don't want to extend that to like an hour and a half, but it'll probably be 2 30 to 40 minute episodes. And then the final chapter. It's the final count. Sorry, couldn't help it. Okay. Question. Who's got the question? Come on. We know you have the questions. We have ways of making you talk. I know. This one will be related to one I asked, well, technically just last week in Deathworld Origins Chapter 2. What is your favorite historical time period? Personally, I'm all into the Crusades. Leave your answers in the comments down below. Until next time, be safe, be well. I love you all.